The military officers stood at her door, their faces stone cold and serious. Jasmine's hands trembled as she gripped the doorknob. She was just 17 years old. She had no family in the service, no connections to the military at all. So why were they here? And why were they asking about an old man she brought breakfast to every morning? Before we go any further, I want to invite you to subscribe to the Black Voices if you haven't already. We share stories that matter, stories about real people and real kindness that often go unheard. Hit that like button and let us know in the comments what this story means to you. Your voice matters here. Jasmine Clark lived in a small neighborhood on the south side of Richmond, Virginia, in a narrow row house that had seen better days. The paint on the shutters was peeling, and the front steps creaked loud enough to wake the whole block. But it was home. It was all she and her grandmother had, and Jasmine never complained. She woke up every morning at 5:30, while the sky was still dark and the streets were quiet except for the occasional hum of a delivery truck or the distant bark of a dog. She would tiptoe through the hallway so she wouldn't wake her grandmother, whose bedroom was right next to the kitchen. Her grandmother had raised her since she was 3 years old. After Jasmine's mother passed away from an illness the family didn't like to talk about, her grandmother worked 2 jobs well into her 60s just to keep them afloat. And now at 72, her joints ached and her breath came short whenever she climbed the stairs. Jasmine saw it. She saw everything. And she made a quiet promise to herself that she would take care of her grandmother, the way her grandmother had taken care of her. Every morning, Jasmine made breakfast. Nothing fancy. Scrambled eggs, toast, sometimes grits if there was enough butter. She'd make 2 plates, one for her grandmother and one for herself. But about a year ago, she started making 3. It happened by accident, really. She had been walking to the bus stop one cold October morning, cutting through the alley behind the row of old brick buildings that lined Marshall Street. That's when she saw him. An old man sitting on a folding chair outside the back door of a rundown building that looked like it hadn't been lived in for years. He was bundled up in a coat that was too big for him, his hands tucked under his arms, his head tilted down like he was asleep, but his eyes were open. He was just staring at the ground. Jasmine slowed her steps. She didn't know him. She'd never seen him before, but something about the way he sat there, so still, so alone, made her chest feel tight. She thought about her grandmother. She thought about how invisible people can become when they get old, when the world stops seeing them as valuable. She stood there for a moment, her backpack heavy on her shoulders, and then she kept walking. But she couldn't stop thinking about him. The next morning, she made an extra plate. She wrapped it in foil, still warm, and she walked through that alley again. He was there in the same spot wearing the same coat. This time she stopped. She walked right up to him and held out the plate. "Breakfast," she said simply. He looked up at her, his face weathered and lined, his eyes a faded gray that seemed to carry the weight of 1,000 untold stories. He didn't say anything at first. He just looked at the plate, then at her, then back at the plate. Slowly he reached out and took it. His hands were shaking. "Thank you," he said. His voice was rough, like gravel on pavement. She nodded and walked away before he could say anything else. She didn't want thanks. She didn't want recognition. She just wanted to help. And so it became a routine. Every morning, Jasmine made 3 plates of breakfast, one for her grandmother, one for herself, and one for the old man in the alley. She never asked his name. He never offered it. But every morning he was there. And every morning she brought him food. Sometimes it was eggs and toast. Sometimes it was oatmeal or a biscuit with jam. Whatever she could make, she shared. Her grandmother noticed, of course. One morning, as Jasmine was wrapping up the extra plate, her grandmother shuffled into the kitchen in her robe and slippers. "Who's that for?" she asked, nodding toward the foil-wrapped food. "Just someone who needs it," Jasmine said. Her grandmother studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "You got a good heart, baby. Just be careful out there." Jasmine promised she would be. Weeks turned into months. Fall turned into winter, then spring. The old man never said much. Sometimes he'd nod when she handed him the plate. Sometimes he'd say thank you. Once he told her the eggs were good. She smiled at that. It was the most he'd ever said. But she started to notice things. The way his coat hung looser on his frame as the months went by. The way his hands shook more than they used to. The way he coughed sometimes, deep and rattling, and had to lean forward to catch his breath. She wanted to ask if he was okay. She wanted to ask if he had a place to sleep, if he needed help, if there was anyone looking after him. But she never did. She didn't want to embarrass him. She didn't want to make him feel like a charity case, so she just kept bringing breakfast. One morning in late April, she came through the alley and he wasn't there. The folding chair was still there, leaning against the brick wall, but he was gone. Jasmine stood there for a moment, holding the warm plate in her hands, her heart sinking. She looked around, hoping maybe he'd just stepped away for a minute. But the alley was empty. She left the plate on the chair just in case. The next morning, he was back. But he looked different, weaker. His face was pale, and there were dark circles under his eyes. When she handed him the plate, his hands were shaking so badly he almost dropped it. "You okay?" she asked, breaking her usual silence. He looked at her, and for the first time, she saw something like vulnerability in his eyes. "I'm all right," he said quietly, "just tired." She wanted to say more. She wanted to ask what was wrong, wanted to insist he see a doctor, but she didn't. She just nodded and told him to take care of himself. Then she left for school. That afternoon, when she came home, her grandmother was sitting at the kitchen table with a strange look on her face. "Baby," she said slowly, "someone came by looking for you today." Jasmine froze. "Who?" Didn't give a name. Said they'd come back. A strange unease settled over Jasmine, but she shrugged it off. Probably nothing. But the next morning, when she came through the alley, the old man wasn't there again. This time the chair was gone too. The space where he used to sit was just empty pavement, like he'd never been there at all. Jasmine stood there, clutching the plate, her stomach twisting with worry. She didn't know where he lived. She didn't know his name. She had no way to find him. She went to school that day with a heavy heart. And then, that evening, there was a knock at the door. Jasmine was in her room doing homework when she heard it. 3 firm, deliberate knocks. Her grandmother called out from the living room. "Jasmine, baby, can you get that?" Jasmine set down her pencil and walked to the front door. When she opened it, her breath caught in her throat. 2 men stood on her front steps, both dressed in military uniforms. One was older, maybe in his 50s, with broad shoulders and a stern face. The other was younger, closer to 30, with kind eyes and a calm expression. They both looked at her with a seriousness that made her heart race. "Are you Jasmine Clark?" the older officer asked. "Yes," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "May we come in?" She stepped aside, her mind spinning. Her grandmother appeared in the doorway to the living room, her face tight with concern. "What's this about?" her grandmother asked. The officers stepped inside, removing their hats respectfully. The older one spoke first. "We're here about Arthur Monroe." Jasmine blinked. "Who?" "The man you've been bringing breakfast to every morning for the past year," the younger officer said gently. "His name is Arthur Monroe. He's a veteran." Jasmine felt her knees go weak. "A veteran?" The older officer nodded. "Staff Sergeant Arthur Monroe. Served 3 tours in Vietnam. Decorated, purple. Heart, bronze star. After the war, he struggled. Lost his family. Lost his home. Ended up on the streets." Jasmine's grandmother sank into a chair, her hand over her mouth. "Is he okay?" Jasmine asked, her voice shaking. "I haven't seen him in 2 days." The younger officer smiled softly. "He's in the hospital. Pneumonia. He's stable now, but it was close. When the paramedics brought him in, he kept talking about a girl who brought him breakfast. Wouldn't stop talking about it. Said you saved his life." Jasmine's eyes filled with tears. I just brought him food. That's all." The older officer's stern expression softened. "Miss Clark, do you have any idea what you did for him? Arthur Monroe spent years on those streets." No one looked at him. No one cared. He told us there were days he didn't want to wake up, days he thought about just giving up. But then you showed up, every single morning. No matter the weather, no matter what. You gave him a reason to keep going." Jasmine wiped her eyes, her voice breaking. "I didn't know. I didn't know any of that." The younger officer reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "He asked us to give you this." Jasmine took the paper with trembling hands. She unfolded it carefully. The handwriting was shaky, but the words were clear. "Dear Jasmine, I don't know if I'll ever get the chance to say this to your face, but I need you to know. You saved me, Not just my body, but my soul. I was ready to disappear. I thought the world had forgotten me. But you saw me. Every morning you saw me. You reminded me that I still mattered, that I was still human. I don't have much left in this world, but I'm working with these officers to make sure you get something. You deserve so much more than I can give, but I hope this helps. Thank you for being the light in my darkest days. Arthur. Jasmine couldn't speak. She just stood there, tears streaming down her face, holding the letter like it was the most precious thing in the world. The older officer cleared his throat. Arthur set up a fund before he got sick. It's not a fortune, but it's enough to help with your schooling. He wanted to make sure you had a chance at a future. He said you gave him one, so it's only fair. Jasmine shook her head, overwhelmed. I can't take that. I didn't do it for money. I didn't do it for anything. We know, the younger officer said, but he wants you to have it. And honestly, Miss Clark, you've done more for him than any of us ever could. You gave him dignity. You gave him hope. Her grandmother stood and wrapped her arms around Jasmine, both of them crying now. The officers stayed for a little while longer, answering questions, explaining that Arthur was going to be moved to a veteran's home, where he'd get proper care. They promised Jasmine she could visit him as soon as he was strong enough. And before they left, the older officer turned back to her. The world needs more people like you, he said. Don't ever stop being that person. After they left, Jasmine sat on the couch with her grandmother, still holding Arthur's letter. She read it again and again, each word sinking deeper into her heart. She thought about all those mornings, all those quiet moments in the alley. She had never imagined that something so small could mean so much. A week later, she visited Arthur in the hospital. He was sitting up in bed, still frail, but with more color in his cheeks. When he saw her walk through the door, his face lit up in a way she'd never seen before. There she is, he said, his voice stronger now. My guardian angel. Jasmine laughed through her tears and sat down beside his bed. I'm no angel. I just made breakfast. He shook his head. You did more than that. You reminded an old man that he still had worth. That's more than most people ever do. They talked for over an hour. He told her stories about his life, about the war, about the family he'd lost and the mistakes he'd made. He told her about the years of loneliness, the cold nights, the hunger, the shame, and he told her that her simple act of kindness had pulled him back from the edge. When it was time to go, Jasmine promised she'd visit again. And she did. Every week. Sometimes they just sat in silence. Sometimes they talked about everything and nothing. And slowly, Arthur began to heal. Not just his body, but his spirit. Months later, Jasmine graduated high school. Arthur was there, sitting in the audience in his old military uniform, cleaned and pressed. When they called her name, he stood and clapped louder than anyone else. And when she walked across that stage, she looked out into the crowd and saw him smiling, tears in his eyes, and she knew that everything had come full circle. The fund Arthur set up paid for her first 2 years of college. She studied social work, determined to help people like him. People the world had forgotten. And every time she felt tired or discouraged, she thought about those mornings in the alley. She thought about the power of showing up, of seeing people, of treating everyone with dignity no matter where they are in life. Arthur lived another 5 years. He spent them in the veterans' home, surrounded by people who cared, visited regularly by Jasmine and her grandmother. And when he finally passed away peacefully in his sleep, Jasmine spoke at his memorial. She told everyone there about the man who had taught her that kindness is never wasted, that even the smallest act of love can change a life, that we all have the power to be someone's reason to keep going. So here's what I want you to take away from this. You never know what someone is carrying. You never know what battle they're fighting or how close they are to giving up. But you have the power to change that. A smile, a kind word, a warm meal, a moment of your time. These things matter more than you could ever imagine. Jasmine didn't set out to be a hero. She just saw someone who needed help and she helped. That's all it takes. So I'm asking you, who can you see today? Who can you show up for? Share your thoughts in the comments. Tell us about a time someone showed up for you, or a time you showed up for someone else. Let's keep this conversation going. Because these stories, these voices, they matter. And maybe, just maybe, your story will inspire someone else to be the light in someone's darkest day. Thank you for watching The Black Voices. Until next time, keep seeing people. Keep showing up. Keep being the change.